All right, let's dive into this law of polarity thing. We're looking at Violet Spring's book, Abundance, The Whole Truth, specifically at the chapter on this whole law of polarity.
Yeah, it's a fascinating concept.
Have you ever felt, like stuck in that black and white thinking, like it has to be this or that, no in between?
Right, like no room for nuance.
Exactly. Well, Violet Spring says, recognizing those gray areas.
Yeah, the gray areas.
Can, unlock some serious potential for change and growth.
Absolutely. And it's interesting how she frames this whole idea of opposites. She doesn't just say everything has an opposite.
Right.
It's more like, within all things lies its exact opposite.
Ooh, I like that.
Yeah, it's subtle, but it points to this idea that opposites aren't separate. They're intertwined.
Okay.
Like she uses examples like right and wrong, good and bad, true and false.
Mm-hmm.
But then she goes deeper, arguing that this law of polarity, affects how we see the world.
Yeah.
Even down to our judgments and how we interact with everything around us.
Mm-hmm. Wow, so it's really ingrained in us.
Exactly.
Okay, so then she talks about the ego, right?
Yeah, the ego.
And how that can kind of keep us stuck in one side of this polarity.
For sure.
She uses some pretty vivid terms to describe this,
Oh yeah, she does.
She talks about the skeptic, the cynic,
Mm-hmm.
that voice in our heads, that glass half-empty perspective.
Absolutely.
So how do we know if we're stuck in this, ego-driven polarity? Does she give us any clues?
She does. One of the key signs she points to is resistance to change.
Yeah.
Even when we're presented with evidence that challenges our viewpoint.
Yeah.
The ego can make us dig in our heels.
It's we don't even want to consider the other side.
Right. It's almost like admitting there's another side, another perspective. It would require us to completely overhaul our entire belief system.
Whoa, that's intense. So it's not just about recognizing that opposites exist. It's also about being aware of how our ego might be influencing our perceptions.
Totally. And that's where she introduces this concept of the gray area.
Yes. The gray area.
It's that space between those stark opposites. The space the ego wants to avoid.
She keeps mentioning the gray area, but what does she actually mean by that? It sounds a little vague.
Yeah, I know what you mean. She uses this powerful image of an iceberg to illustrate her point. What we see on the surface is just a tiny fraction of what lies beneath, right?
Yeah.
The gray area is that vast underwater space where all the complexity and nuance reside.
So it's not about abandoning our beliefs entirely. It's more about recognizing that there's always more to the story, more perspectives to consider.
Exactly. And embracing this gray area requires us to step outside of our comfort zones. It means being willing to see things from multiple angles.
Okay.
Even if those angles make us uncomfortable.
Makes me think about how we consume information these days, especially with social media and the 24/7 news cycle. Everyone's got a strong opinion about everything. It's easy to get pulled into those polarized camps.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And Violet Spring addresses that in the chapter. She specifically talks about the idea of polarity in our current political and social landscape.
Yeah, I remember that part.
She uses some strong language for sure.
She talks about how we're often battling each other.
Yeah, battle.
From these entrenched positions, unwilling to even consider the other side's point of view.
And this is where that iceberg analogy comes back into play.
Yeah.
We're only seeing the tip of the iceberg, the most visible aspects of the conflict. But underneath the surface, there are all these historical and cultural and economic factors that have shaped those differing viewpoints.
Oh, so she's not saying all viewpoints are equally valid, is she?
No, not at all.
Okay.
She acknowledges there are real issues at stake, and that some viewpoints are more aligned with, truth and justice than others.
Okay, that makes sense. But she's also kind of cautioning against falling into that trap of us versus them thinking, where we demonize anyone who disagrees with us.
Exactly. And this is where that critical thinking toolkit comes back into play.
Right.
She encourages us to be skeptical of simplistic narratives.
Okay.
To question the information we're being fed.
Yeah.
And to seek out multiple perspectives.
So it's about being discerning consumers of information, not just accepting everything at face value.
Exactly. That's the key.
Which brings us back to that gray area. Maybe that's where we find the common ground. Those shared human experiences that can help us bridge the gap between, opposing sides.
That's a really insightful way to put it, I think. It's something Violet Spring hints at throughout the chapter. She talks about how we often forget that those on the other side are also human beings,
Yeah.
with their own unique experiences and perspectives.
So how do we start exploring this gray area? Does she give us any practical advice on how to actually do that?
Well, she definitely emphasizes the importance of critical thinking. And not just in terms of, evaluating information from outside sources.
Yeah.
But also in terms of examining our own beliefs and assumptions.
So it's about questioning everything, both inside and out.
Exactly. She suggests that one way to do this is to deliberately seek out opposing viewpoints.
Okay.
To expose ourselves to ideas that challenge our comfort zones.
I see, yeah. If you really want to test the strength of your beliefs, you got to put them up against their opposites.
Right, exactly. And see how they hold up.
And see how they hold up.
She does caution, though, that this process can be uncomfortable.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
It's not always easy to confront our own biases, and potentially have our cherished beliefs challenged.
That's tough. But she seems to suggest that it's ultimately worth it.
Absolutely. She argues that letting go of those rigid, outdated beliefs can be a really liberating experience.
Oh, okay.
Freeing us to see the world in a new light and to connect with others more authentically.
And that kind of ties back to the idea of the law of polarity, right? It's not just about understanding that opposites exist. It's about using that understanding to create a more, balanced, harmonious, fulfilling life.
Exactly. She suggests that by embracing those opposing forces, those seemingly contradictory viewpoints, we can tap into the full potential of this universal law.
This is making me think about how Violet Spring connects the law of polarity to the idea of truth.
Yes, she does.
She even uses the term battles when describing how we cling to our version of the truth.
Oh, yeah.
Often refusing to acknowledge the possibility of, other truths.
It's like we're at war with anyone who sees things differently.
Right. It's like she's suggesting that truth is not this, fixed point, but something that emerges from the interaction of those opposing forces.
That's a great way to think about it. And she argues that this is especially important in our current information landscape, right? Where we're constantly bombarded with different versions of truth.
So how do we navigate this? How do we apply the law of polarity to help us, discern truth from falsehood in this age of information overload?
Well, she offers some very practical advice on that.
Okay.
Emphasizing the importance of critical thinking and media literacy. She encourages us to question everything we read, hear, and see, looking for hidden agendas and biases.
So instead of just passively absorbing information, we need to be actively engaging with it, analyzing it, looking for those different perspectives.
Precisely. And she even gives some specific tips on how to do this.
Oh, like what?
Like researching information from various sources, looking for evidence to support claims.
Okay.
And being mindful of our own personal biases.
Right. It's like she's giving us a toolkit to become more discerning consumers of information.
She is. And she reminds us that it's an ongoing process, a skill that we need to continuously develop and practice.
This is all really fascinating, but I'm curious to know more about how Violet Spring suggests we actually apply the law of polarity in our own lives.
That's a great question. And it's something we'll delve deeper into in the next part of our deep dive.
Well, can't wait.
So Violet Spring doesn't just talk about the law of polarity in, abstract terms.
Right.
She gives some concrete examples of how it, plays out in the real world.
Okay, like what?
Well, one that really struck me was her discussion of personal biases.
Oh, okay.
She argues that we all have these unconscious biases that shape how we see the world.
Right.
And these biases are often rooted in the law of polarity.
So it's like we're predisposed to see things in a certain way, based on our past experiences, beliefs, and values.
Exactly. And Violet Spring suggests that by becoming aware of these biases, by acknowledging the opposite perspective, we can start to loosen their grip on our thinking.
So how do we do that? How do we even identify our biases in the first place?
That's where the gray area comes back into play.
Ah, okay.
She encourages us to challenge our assumptions.
Okay.
To ask ourselves, what if the opposite of what I believe is true?
That sounds kind of radical, honestly. Isn't there a danger in questioning everything we believe?
She acknowledges that it can be uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Even a bit scary to confront our own biases.
I can see that.
But she also argues that it's an essential part of personal growth.
It's like she's saying that if we want to evolve, if we want to become more open-minded and compassionate individuals, we need to be willing to step outside of those, comfortable polarized boxes.
Exactly. And she even suggests that this process of questioning our biases can lead to, like, unexpected breakthroughs.
Oh, wow.
Helping us to identify and release limiting beliefs that might be holding us back from, living our full potential.
I like how she frames it as a liberating experience, as a way to free ourselves from those, like, rigid, outdated ways of thinking.
And this idea of liberation connects really well to her discussion of relationships.
Oh, interesting.
She talks about how the law of polarity can help us to navigate conflict more effectively, to see those disagreements as opportunities for growth and understanding, rather than as, like, threats to our ego.
Okay, that's interesting. How does she apply the law of polarity to relationships?
Well, she argues that when we're in conflict with someone, it's easy to get caught up in that black and white thinking.
Oh, yeah.
To see the other person as wrong and ourselves as right.
Yeah, I think we've all been there. It's like our ego wants to protect itself, so it shuts down any possibility of seeing the situation from the other person's perspective.
Precisely. And Violet Spring suggests that instead of digging in our heels and defending our position, we can use the law of polarity to create space for understanding.
So how do we do that in practice?
She emphasizes the importance of listening, really truly listening to the other person's point of view, even if we disagree with it.
Yeah.
And not just listen to respond, but listening to understand.
It's like she's saying we need to approach those conversations with curiosity rather than judgment.
Exactly. And she even suggests that we can use the law of polarity to find common ground, to identify those shared values or goals that might be hidden beneath the surface of the disagreement.
It sounds like she's advocating for a more compassionate and collaborative approach to conflict resolution.
She is. And she argues that this approach can be incredibly powerful, leading to more fulfilling relationships and a greater sense of connection and understanding.
Okay, so we've talked about personal biases and relationships, but Violet Spring also mentions global issues and current events, right?
She does.
Okay.
And she suggests that the law of polarity can help us to make sense of these complex issues.
Right.
To see beyond the, like, polarized rhetoric and find those nuanced perspectives that are often missing from, mainstream media.
So it's not about pretending that everything is relative and that there are no right or wrong answers.
No. She acknowledges that there are real issues at stake and that some viewpoints are more aligned with truth and justice than others.
Right.
But she also seems to be cautioning against falling into that trap of us versus them thinking.
Yeah.
Where we demonize anyone who disagrees with us. And this is where that critical thinking toolkit comes back into play. She encourages us to be skeptical of simplistic narratives, to question the information we're being fed, and to seek out multiple perspectives.
So it's about being, like, discerning consumers of information, not just accepting everything at face value.
Precisely. And she even gives some specific tips on how to do this.
Like what?
She talks about fact-checking information.
Okay.
Being aware of the biases of different news sources and seeking out perspectives from those who have lived experiences relevant to the issue at hand.
It's like she's saying that if we want to make informed decisions about the issues that matter most to us, we need to be willing to do the work of critical thinking and engage with the complexity of the world.
Exactly. And she argues that this is not just an intellectual exercise, but a moral imperative.
That's a pretty powerful statement.
It is. And she suggests that by embracing the law of polarity, by acknowledging the existence of multiple truths and perspectives, we can create a more just, compassionate, and sustainable world.
This is a lot to take in. It seems like the law of polarity has implications for virtually every aspect of our lives.
It does. And we haven't even touched on how it relates to the concept of manifestation, which is, a major theme in Violet Spring's book.
Okay, now you've piqued my curiosity. How does the law of polarity tie into manifestation?
Well, that's something we'll explore in the final part of our deep dive.
Okay, so we're back, and you were about to explain how the law of polarity ties into manifestation.
Yeah, so it might seem a little counterintuitive at first.
Yeah.
But Violet Spring, she argues that understanding polarity is, like, essential for manifesting our desires.
Really? Okay, I'm intrigued. I thought manifestation was all about, like, focusing on the positive, visualizing what you want to attract,
It is. But she points out that ignoring the negative or the opposite of what we desire can actually, like, hinder the whole process.
So it's not about pretending everything's perfect all the time.
Exactly. She suggests that by acknowledging the existence of the opposite of what we want, we actually empower ourselves to create a more balanced and sustainable reality.
Can you give me, like, a concrete example? What does that mean, like, practically for manifestation?
Sure. Let's say you're trying to manifest financial abundance. A lot of manifestation techniques would focus on visualizing yourself having lots of money, feeling the emotions associated with wealth, and so on.
Right, that's pretty standard manifestation advice.
Yeah, but Violet Spring suggests that it's also important to acknowledge the opposite of abundance, which is lack or scarcity.
Wait, so you're saying I should be visualizing myself being broke? That doesn't sound very motivating.
No, not exactly. It's not about dwelling on those negative feelings, but rather about, acknowledging their existence. By recognizing the presence of lack in our lives, maybe in our beliefs or past experiences, we can start to, release its hold on us.
So it's about becoming aware of those limiting beliefs. That might be blocking our ability to manifest abundance.
Exactly. She suggests that when we try to ignore or suppress those negative aspects, they actually gain more power.
Okay.
It's like trying to hold a beach ball underwater. Eventually, it's going to pop back up with, even more force.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. So by acknowledging the existence of those opposing forces, we're creating space for the positive to, flow more freely.
That's the idea. She says true manifestation comes from a place of balance.
Yeah.
From recognizing that both abundance and lack exist within us, and that we have the power to choose which one we want to focus on and cultivate.
This is really shifting my understanding of manifestation. It's not just about wishful thinking or positive affirmations. It's about doing the inner work to address those limiting beliefs.
Yeah.
And create a more aligned, energetic state.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And that idea of alignment is key to her whole approach. She argues that the law of polarity is not just about understanding the existence of opposites, but about using that understanding to create a more balanced and harmonious life.
So it's about finding that sweet spot, that middle ground where those opposing forces can coexist without, creating chaos or conflict.
Precisely. And she suggests that this is where true power and creativity reside, in that space of dynamic tension between the opposites.
This has been such an insightful deep dive. I feel like I have a whole new perspective on the law of polarity and how it can apply to so many different areas of life.
Me too. And I think Violet Spring would be happy to know we're having this conversation, that we're engaging with these concepts and exploring how they can help us live, more fulfilling and meaningful lives.
Absolutely. Before we wrap up, is there any final thought you want to leave our listeners with?
I think Violet Spring summed it up perfectly when she asked, what truth are you holding on to that might benefit from exploring its opposite?
Wow, that's a powerful question. It's a challenge to step outside of our comfort zones, to be curious, and to be open to the possibility that there's always more to learn and discover.
Exactly. And by embracing that spirit of inquiry, by recognizing the power of polarity, we can unlock a whole new level of understanding, growth, and transformation.
Well, that's a great note to end on. To our listener, we encourage you to keep exploring the law of polarity in your own life. See how it plays out in your relationships, your beliefs, and your experiences. You might be surprised by what you discover.
And until next time, keep seeking, keep questioning, and keep embracing those gray areas.
Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.
Being a soul star is easy. Just like and subscribe to join the journey. Thanks for watching.